She was denied the right to cash her own check because of the color of her skin. No ID issue, no error in the system, just a glance, a pause, and a refusal rooted in something deeper, colder. In a pristine lobby filled with polished marble and practiced smiles, one black woman stood still as quiet judgment wrapped around her like chains, invisible but unrelenting. They didn't ask her name. They didn't care to check her credentials. Instead, they assumed, redirected, and dismissed. What no one in that bank knew, not the teller, not the manager, not even the compliance officer peering from behind the glass, was that the woman they humiliated held more power than anyone in that room. She watched them write her off, unaware they were sealing their own fate. This isn't just a story about discrimination. It's a story about how the foundations of arrogance can be shattered by truth, and how justice can walk in quietly and still turn the world on its head. Stick around, hit like, subscribe for the full journey, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. What do you think happens when the one they tried to erase turns out to own the ground they stand on? The automatic glass doors of Redstone First Bank shuddered slightly before sliding open, the delay subtle but noticeable, like the building itself hesitated to let Lenora Graves inside. She stepped forward, heels tapping gently against the marble floor, the echo folding into the hush of the high-ceilinged lobby. The bank smelled of eucalyptus and chilled air, but as she crossed the threshold, the scent vanished, replaced by the sterile undertone of processed airflow. No one glanced her way, or perhaps everyone did, but only long enough to decide she didn't require acknowledgement. The light from the skylight above hit the center of the lobby like a spotlight. Lenora passed through it and received no warmth. She wore a navy wrap coat, simple but carefully cut, and carried a matte black satchel. Her hair, tightly coiled, was swept into a low bun, professional, restrained. She moved directly to the concierge station, where a young man in a gray suit sat behind a black stone counter beneath a brushed brass sign that read, "Client Engagement." As Lenora approached, the young man's expression, open and welcoming for the white couple he had just greeted, dulled into neutrality. Without meeting her gaze, he rotated the available plaque to "In Session" and stared at his monitor. She waited in front of him for several seconds before he glanced up. His eyes flicked to her coat, then to her bag. He leaned back. "Can I help you, ma'am?" It was phrased like a challenge, not an offer. Lenora reached into her satchel, pulled out a sealed envelope, and placed it gently on the desk. "I'm here to deposit a check into my trust account." She spoke evenly, clearly. The man didn't touch the envelope. He tapped at his keyboard instead. "Your name?" "Lenora Graves." His brow furrowed for a moment before he typed again. Then he stood, retrieved a plastic visitor badge, and slid it toward her. It read "Vendor" in black ink. Lenora paused. She was a managing trustee, not a vendor. But saying so would invite friction she didn't need yet. She clipped the badge to her coat and turned toward the teller area. The teller counter stretched along the far wall, sleek and modern, separated into four polished stone stations with velvet ropes and gold stanchions guiding the line. Clients with sleek briefcases and wool overcoats were offered bottled water and escorted directly past the line. As Lenora stepped into the designated lane, she caught her reflection in the glossy marble wall. She did not look out of place, she looked out of context. One man ahead of her, a silver-haired executive type, handed over his transaction papers and was rewarded with a warm laugh from the teller, followed by a handshake and a coupon for concierge parking. When it was Lenora's turn, she stepped forward, but the teller, mid-40s, blonde, hair in a tight bun, looked past her and beckoned the man behind her instead. Lenora stayed where she was. The teller blinked as if startled, then said flatly, "Oh, I didn't see you there." No apology. Lenora placed the envelope on the counter. The teller stared at it, then at Lenora. She pulled on a pair of gloves, blue nitrile, surgical, before opening it. The check was a cashier's draft issued from Graves Municipal Holdings, payable to Redstone Trust Depository. The teller raised her eyebrows. "And this is for what?" "Trust account deposit. I'm the account signatory." The teller nodded slowly, as if she hadn't really heard. "One moment, please." She left the counter, check in hand, and disappeared into the restricted corridor behind her. Lenora stood silently. No offer of a seat. No explanation. No eye contact from anyone else in the lobby. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. People came and went. 2 new clients entered and were greeted by name. A young man in sneakers received a complimentary coffee. Lenora remained standing. When the teller returned, she brought a stapled packet and slid it across the counter. "I need you to complete this." "What is it?" "Source of funds certification." "This is a verified cashier's check." "Doesn't matter. Compliance protocol requires supplemental documentation for new account contributors." "I'm not a contributor. I'm the managing trustee." The teller offered a tight smile. "That's not reflected in the profile." Lenora's pulse ticked upward, but her voice didn't change. She retrieved her trustee ID from her wallet and set it down, a laminated card with embedded security threads and embossed seal. The teller picked it up, turned it in her gloved hands, and said, "This will have to be reviewed. Please wait over by the brochure rack." She gestured toward a narrow metal display by the security office. No seats. No shade from the skylight above. Lenora walked there without speaking. 15 minutes passed. The smell of citrus returned briefly as 2 suited men walked past her toward the executive suites. She heard one say something about underwriting strategy and laughed. No one made eye contact with her. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. A security guard emerged from the side hallway and stood near the front exit, glancing her way more than once. When the teller returned, she didn't come alone. A man in a cobalt suit followed her, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Graves, we're seeing a name discrepancy in the account archive." "What discrepancy?" "The signatory information doesn't match the registry encoding." "That's incorrect. The account was refiled last November after the municipal reinvestment agreement." The banker raised his hand to stop her. "We're going to need to escalate this. We'll initiate a verification through our legal affiliate." "How long will that take?" "Up to 7 business days. I have documents on file here. I brought notarized versions today." "Doesn't matter. A red flag's a red flag. Do you even know what the flag is?" The concierge desk was empty. She approached the teller area directly, envelope once again in hand, badge clipped to her coat. It still read vendor. No one had changed it. She had considered not wearing it at all, but knew they would use that, too, as cause for suspicion. As she neared the counter, she passed a large digital screen mounted on the side wall. It was scrolling through a presentation of client names, welcoming them to Redstone. "Welcome, Mr. Amari. Welcome, Ms. Bennett. Welcome, Mr. Callahan." One name every 15 seconds. All neatly typed, last names centered in gold font. Lenora slowed her steps and waited. The loop restarted. The names repeated. Her name wasn't there. It should have been. The protocol required that scheduled trust appointments be queued in the display rotation. She had submitted the necessary forms 3 weeks ago. She watched the loop twice more. 45 names. Hers not among them. She moved toward the teller lanes. A young woman in a burgundy blazer with a small Redstone logo on the lapel approached with a trained smile. Before she could speak, Lenora said, "I'm here to complete a trust deposit. My paperwork is on file." The woman nodded, but her eyes flicked downward. "Can I see your appointment confirmation?" Lenora pulled it from her satchel and handed it over. It was printed, signed, and time-stamped. The woman studied it for a long moment, then tilted her head. "One moment." She stepped away, returning with a senior banker, not the same as before, but with a similar blue suit and polished effect. The banker took the appointment sheet, scanned it, and frowned. "I don't see your name in today's system. We don't appear to have anything scheduled." "I submitted this electronically," Lenora said, "and received confirmation." "You may have sent it to the generic inbox," the banker replied. "Sometimes those go unanswered." He handed the paper back without meeting her eyes. "You'll need to resubmit, I'm afraid." "That won't be possible. This check is time-sensitive." The banker sighed and waved over a teller. "We'll see what we can do." The teller, a young man this time, retrieved the check envelope and began reviewing it. The gloves again. He put them on, pulled the check out, held it under a UV light, and then placed it in a tray beside him. He returned with a clipboard. "This is a different verification form than last time," Lenora noted. "The policies change for large deposits. Your transaction qualified for enhanced screening." The form was almost identical to the previous, but the language was sharper. Terms like suspicious transaction indicators, potential structuring, and source irregularities dotted the page. It asked her to list 3 personal references, 2 banking institutions, and her previous employment record, going back 20 years. Lenora filled it out carefully, methodically. She listed the law firms she had worked for during her early career. She listed Graves Municipal Holdings. She listed the community development fund she had co-founded. The teller took the form, reviewed it, and said he needed to confirm a few entries. He disappeared into the back. Again, while she waited, Lenora wandered back toward the digital welcome display. Still no name. The loop repeated again and again, every name beaming in gold, animated like a hotel lobby's VIP board. She looked away. In the nearby corner stood a coffee station, porcelain cups, raw sugar packets, 2 blends of roast. As she approached, a woman in a maroon dress jacket stepped between her and the carafe. "Oh, sorry," she said curtly. "This is for scheduled clients only." Lenora opened her mouth, then closed it. She returned to the teller station where the banker had come back with the clipboard. He pointed to one line on the form. "This address is different from what we have on file. That's my office address. I submitted a change of business address months ago." The banker gave a short laugh. "That explains it. These inconsistencies trigger red flags. The system doesn't understand your story, Ms. Graves. It likes everything to be neat. My story isn't the issue. The bank's recognition of my status is." The banker didn't reply. Instead, he looked over his shoulder at the security camera above the teller window and muttered something under his breath. The teller returned and placed her check back into the envelope. "We'll need 72 hours for formal clearance." Again, "That's already passed. I came 2 days ago." The teller offered a tight smile. "Then I guess the clock starts today." Lenora stood there for a moment. She glanced at the screen again, then down at the name badge on her coat. Vendor. No water offered. No one stopped her. The scent of citrus, stronger than before, clung to the air like a gatekeeper. The concierge glanced up but did not engage. Lenora passed him without acknowledgement. The same digital welcome screen rotated behind her, still displaying names that weren't hers. She didn't check. She didn't need to. She had memorized its cadence. At the teller line, she waited less than a minute before a banker emerged from the corridor behind the counter and gestured for her to follow. He was not the one from yesterday. This one was older, lean, with glasses and a tie knotted too tightly at the throat. As he led her into a small conference room with a glass wall facing the atrium, she noticed the table had already been set with a stack of forms. This was not her first encounter with institutional hostility, but even she was struck by the quiet choreography of today's arrangement. The banker sat without offering her a seat. She remained standing until he said, "Please, let's begin." She sat down and opened her folder. Before she could speak, he began to explain. "Your trust account triggered an automatic escalation. Our compliance team flagged several inconsistencies in your documentation, as well as your signature history. We'll be asking for additional materials." "I provided notarized copies of every legal document," Lenora replied. "The forms match the records your own bank approved during onboarding." "Yes," he said, not looking up. "But these are what we call provisional verifications. We require origin-based confirmations to complete a trust transaction over our threshold." Lenora frowned. "I'm sorry, origin-based confirmations?" He lifted a page and tapped it with a pen. "We'll need original signatures from any co-founding members of your LLC or property holding companies, as well as a statement of purpose for the disbursement of funds within 30 days. That information is in the Articles of Incorporation. Those were filed 5 years ago." The banker nodded slowly. "That's exactly the problem. We need your mission statement reaffirmed, in your own words, under current economic conditions. Lenora's breath caught in her throat. Are you asking for a handwritten statement of intent? Yes, to confirm clarity and prevent ethical misalignment. We've found that requiring such a statement ensures authentic engagement with financial stewardship. That's not banking. That's a personality test. The banker smiled slightly. It's best not to think of it that way. It's a conversation with your fiduciary purpose. She didn't move. Her hand rested on the folder, motionless. He handed her a blank piece of lined paper with the bank's watermark in the corner. Below the watermark were 5 lines, each labeled with a heading: intent, community, legacy, liquidity plan, contingency strategy. Write in blue ink only, please, he said, and handed her a pen. Lenora stared at the sheet. This was not a test of clarity. This was a performance demand, a ritual designed to expose and exhaust. She began to write. Her pen strokes were even, deliberate. She wrote what they wanted to hear, threading phrases about sustainability, responsible reinvestment, and long-term growth. She used the word fiduciary 4 times. When she finished, the banker took the sheet without comment and placed it inside a clear plastic sleeve. He clicked a button under the desk. Moments later, another associate entered. This one was younger, holding a thick binder marked Tier 3 Protocol Audit. He set it down and opened to a page filled with symbols, color-coded tabs, and a form that looked less like a financial document and more like an institutional intake chart. We're initiating an identity continuity check, he said without preamble. Lenora didn't answer. It's routine, he added, although his eyes said otherwise. We just need you to verify a few past affiliations, employment roles, and early career choices. The banker returned with a new form: past income sources and legacy positions. This will take just a moment. Lenora scanned the page. The questions were vague and oddly personal. One asked her to describe the first position she ever held that paid above minimum wage. Another asked her to define the term wealth in her own words. A third asked her to list 3 mentors and how each influenced her business philosophy. This isn't protocol. This is selective probing. The banker looked up at her, tone still flat. You're free to decline. However, doing so will suspend processing. She took the pen again. She wrote slowly, making her answers clinical and exact. There was no room for humanity in this performance. She would not offer them narrative, only facts. When she finished, she looked up. The associate closed the binder and left without a word. The banker stood and nodded. We'll have someone escort you to waiting. There's one more step. She rose, grabbed her folder, and followed him down a narrow corridor behind the teller line. They passed an open office where 2 employees laughed quietly. They passed a break room where porcelain cups clinked against saucers. She was led to a single chair in front of a frosted glass door marked Client Reconciliation. The chair was hard, metal-framed, slightly lower than standard. She sat. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. A woman finally exited the room and handed her a new form, this one with a barcode and a hand-scrawled note at the top, resubmit. Lenora looked at the form. It was the same verification sheet she had filled out the previous day. The exact same. Nothing had changed except the ink color on the signature line. Black, not blue. She blinked. Her body remained still. Her mind did not. She stood up slowly, took the form, and walked back toward the teller station. She stopped at the counter and asked for a new pen. The teller handed her one without comment. She signed it again. Her signature was identical, down to the millimeter. This one, apparently, would suffice. The teller placed the form in a tray, then pressed a button to print a receipt. The printer jammed. The paper curled inside the tray like a coiled rejection. Another teller stepped in, opened the machine, and cleared it. The paper came out smudged. The indecision clung to her fingers as she finally settled on black slacks, a cream blouse, and a dark green blazer that gave no indication of cost, no visible brand, no signal of extravagance, only function. She wore low heels, minimal makeup, and fastened a thin gold bracelet she hadn't worn in years. A gift from her father. Subtle, understated, personal. As she approached the bank, something inside her had already begun to retreat. Her steps were steady, but her body felt heavy, not with physical fatigue, but with the anticipation of yet another ritual of invalidation. She crossed the lobby, ignoring the citrus-scented air that had grown stronger each day, and made her way to the teller counter. A man with a laminated training badge intercepted her before she reached the velvet ropes. "Excuse me, miss, are you with facilities?" She stopped. "No, I'm here for a scheduled appointment." The man's smile didn't falter, but his hand hovered over the tablet in his palm, already navigating to the wrong category. "Do you have a maintenance vendor badge?" She said nothing. She raised her satchel, unzipped it, and handed him the appointment confirmation. His eyes scanned it, then his brow furrowed. "I'll just need to verify this." One moment. He disappeared behind the partition. Lenora stood, arms folded, watching the marble pattern on the floor as other clients were greeted and ushered to seats. She noticed that all of them wore soft-colored clothing, beige, slate blue, pale gray. There was something unspoken in the palette of this place. 15 minutes passed. The trainee returned and motioned for her to follow him. He led her not to the conference room, but to a smaller chamber she hadn't seen before, a sterile glass box with a chrome bench attached to the wall. On the door, in small letters, were the words "Client Presentation, Suite C." It resembled an airport screening room more than a bank office. A woman in a red blazer entered behind her, closed the door, and smiled in a way that held no warmth. "Before we continue," she said, "we need to complete a visual compliance assessment." Lenora's brow tensed. Compliance with what? Protocol 6A. High Security Verification Standards. For certain transaction tiers, we conduct optional but recommended presentation checks. What does that mean? The woman gestured toward the mirror mounted on the wall. It was one-way glass. "We require that your attire and appearance meet professional and procedural norms to avoid triggering any behavioral flags." "I've done nothing that warrants a flag." "This isn't punitive," the woman said lightly. "Just a formality." She handed Lenora a laminated card listing grooming and dress standards. Lenora read it. Hair must be well kept and tied back. Jewelry must be limited to one visible item. No visible wear on clothing seams or shoes. No handwritten notes visible on the skin. Must present a neutral expression. She looked up. Neutral expression? The woman nodded. Emotional display can confuse pattern-based clearance systems. Lenora didn't move. She said, "I've dressed the same way all week." "Yes, and that's part of the anomaly." It raised questions. What kind of questions? Pattern stiffness, non-variable presentation, potential for automated fraud. It's all very technical. She was handed a form and asked to sign. It stated that she consented to appearance documentation for audit purposes. She signed it. What choice did she have? The woman asked her to remove her coat and shoes and place them in a tray on the floor. Lenora complied. She stood there in her blouse and slacks, feet pressed against the cold tile, while the woman circled her slowly, noting details on a tablet. The bracelet caught her attention. Family item? Yes. Gold content? Unplated 14 karat. Value under 500. The woman nodded and made a note. "Do you often wear symbolic items during transactions?" "I wear this bracelet when I need to remember who I am." The woman did not respond. Lenora was handed a static cling badge to place on her blouse. It replaced her vendor tag, but still did not bear her name, only the initials CG for client guest. She dressed again in silence. When she was led back into the main lobby, she noticed the glances. The trainees watched her not with curiosity, but with caution. The scent of citrus was now mixed with sandalwood, a fragrance change she had not noticed before. A subtle signal. The atmosphere was shifting for others, not for her. She returned to the teller station where a man in a checkered suit looked up and smiled. "Ms. Graves, we've been reviewing your prior submissions. Unfortunately, we'll need you to update your transaction timeline." "Again?" "Yes. Our internal ledger team flagged a date inconsistency." Your notarized forms say Q1 disbursement, but our system reads Q2. That's a formatting issue, not an error. Even so, we can't approve it as is." Lenora exhaled. "I'll make the correction." The teller handed her a tablet and asked her to sit at a workstation near the rear wall. The seat was too low. The screen was at an angle. Her knees pressed awkwardly against the underside of the desk. As she typed, she noticed her reflection in the glass of the screen. Her face looked calm, but her eyes were distant. The expression she wore was not neutrality. It was resignation wrapped in calculation. She submitted the update, a receipt printed behind the teller, who scanned it and frowned. "The barcode's corrupted. I'll have to ask you to re-enter it." Lenora opened the form again. The system had logged her out. She started from the beginning. Her hands moved more slowly this time. She reached the signature line and paused. Her fingers hovered over the digital pad. This was the 4th version she had signed this week. When the doors finally opened, a uniformed guard unlocked them without a glance. She stepped in, swallowed once again by the scent of citrus, now sharper, almost medicinal. The air itself felt more sterile, as though the building had adapted to scrub her out more effectively. She moved toward the teller station, expecting resistance, and found it waiting in the form of a tall man with a tablet and a laminated badge labeled Client Alignment Specialist. He was in his mid-30s, lean, with a mouth that didn't quite smile even when it tried. He extended a hand, but did not wait for a handshake. "Ms. Graves, you've been selected for Tier 4 procedure routing." She responded with a measured voice. "I was told yesterday that Tier 3 was the highest protocol." His expression remained still. "New procedures. As of this morning, you've been reclassified. This way, please." He led her down a narrow hallway, deeper into the building than she'd gone before. They passed doors marked with abbreviations she didn't recognize, acronyms that hinted at internal structures not meant for client knowledge. At the end of a corridor, they reached a door with a matte black surface and no visible handle. He tapped a sequence on his tablet. The door hissed open. Inside was a room lit by soft panel lights, the walls covered with pale acoustic tiles. In the center stood a glass desk with 2 chairs. On the desk sat a thin laptop, a scanner, and a white binder labeled Protocol Confirmation Log. "Please place your personal items in the tray." She removed her satchel, coat, and phone, placing them in the tray without speaking. The man gestured for her to sit. He remained standing. "We'll begin with authentication layering. Please answer the following." He opened the binder and began reading questions aloud. "What was the square footage of the first home you owned? What was the listed contractor name on your 2016 property development filing? What month did your LLC file its first quarterly tax report under the federal structure?" Lenora answered each question without pause. The facts lived in her. They were not things she had to recall. They were part of how she built her world. But the questions continued. What was the middle name of your second-grade teacher? How many times did you fly commercially in 2019? Have you ever submitted a grant application for a project that failed to launch? She furrowed her brow. These aren't compliance questions. We're building a trust integrity profile. Your responses are recorded not just for accuracy, but for consistency of tone, reaction, and delay latency. She blinked. "You're measuring my pauses?" He didn't answer. The questions continued. Did you ever receive mentorship from a publicly indicted individual? Have you ever renegotiated a contract in a way that financially disadvantaged your counterpart? The room began to tighten around her. She could feel her own pulse in her ears, but her voice did not rise. She answered clearly, factually, coldly. After 45 minutes, the man closed the binder. "Now, we'll need you to review your voice print." He activated the scanner. "Please repeat the phrase. I affirm my fiduciary obligation under institutional oversight." She said it once, then again, then was told to slow down. Now with emphasis. Now with a neutral tone. The scanner clicked after each attempt, capturing samples. The man finally nodded and said, "One more verification." He opened the laptop and showed her a scanned version of a document she had never seen before. It bore her name at the top and several paragraphs of language she would never have written. It described her as a conditional beneficiary of urban revitalization funds and listed an address she did not recognize. This document claims you requested disbursement to an affiliated nonprofit. That's false. That's not my signature. He zoomed in. It's similar. Digitally, it cleared the match threshold. I'm telling you it's a forgery. Then we'll need to escalate the review, which is why you're here. You're suggesting I fabricated this? I'm suggesting the system is determining how to weight your input. My input is the only accurate thing in this room. His tone never changed. Intent is no longer enough, Ms. Graves. Confirmation must be contextual. She leaned forward. You've created a room designed not to validate, but to entrap. We're here to protect institutional trust. And who protects mine? He didn't answer. He shut the laptop. We're finished for today. She stood, retrieved her things, and followed him silently back down the hallway. At the end, he paused and handed her a small slip of paper. She walked through the bank's revolving door with a steady pace, coat buttoned, satchel in hand. Her expression composed into a shell of calm, so tight it felt unbreathable. The lobby was filled with quiet movement. Clients escorted with care, offered branded water bottles, handed fragrant coffee with 2 sugars and a stir stick. She walked past them all, past the marble counter where the concierge still wouldn't look up, and past the velvet ropes without asking for permission. She already had her appointment confirmation printed, time-stamped, documented in triplicate. But when she reached the teller desk, a young associate stepped forward and lifted a tablet between them. Your ID was flagged for anomaly patterning. I'll have to reissue your designation badge. Lenora extended her existing badge labeled CG for client guest, and the associate peeled it off with gloved hands, replacing it with a smaller adhesive tag labeled NP. She paused. What does NP stand for? The associate's smile was thin. Non-priority. Her stomach twisted. She said nothing. He turned away and gestured to a tall woman in a blazer who had been observing from a corner. She approached with a clipboard and motioned for Lenora to follow. We'll be redirecting your appointment to a filtered transaction pod. That wasn't the agreement. Your routing classification was adjusted overnight. Please follow me. She was led down a hallway that was quieter than the others. The carpet here muffled footsteps, the lights dimmer, as though designed to avoid attracting attention. At the end stood a black frame door labeled Section D, Legacy Overflow. Inside, the room was spare. 1 chair, 1 small desk with a mounted screen. No windows. A speaker embedded in the wall. No human teller in sight. Sit, said the voice through the speaker. Lenora obeyed. Place your verification document under the scanner. She did so. The screen lit up and displayed a prompt. State your full name and affiliation. She answered clearly. The screen flickered. A second prompt followed. State your intent in this facility. Again, she answered. Then a third. Identify any legal connections between yourself and this institution. Lenora stared. I'm a trustee. My company holds active accounts, real estate liens, and capital assets through this bank. The screen froze. Please wait while your record is reviewed. She sat in silence for 6 minutes. Then the speaker spoke again. Your verification was denied. For what reason? Incongruent self-representation. Clarify that. The voice was flat. Your stated roles conflict with internal perception records. Perception? The system cannot confirm your contextual alignment with institutional tiers. Are you saying I don't fit your profile? The system has deemed your identity non-affirmative. The phrase struck her like a slap. Non-affirmative. It didn't mean incorrect. It meant unwelcome. She stood, the chair scraping quietly behind her. I want to speak to a human. The screen displayed a timer. Estimated human availability, 1 hour 47 minutes. She stared at it, waited. The timer did not move. She exited the room. No one stopped her. No one looked at her. She returned to the main hall, back into the light of the polished lobby, where an old man in a tailored coat was laughing with a banker over a golf anecdote. She passed them and headed toward the elevator banks, ignoring the calls behind her. She stepped into an elevator, pressed a button marked Operations, and waited. No one joined her. The elevator rose smoothly and opened onto a floor she had never been allowed to see. Here the lighting was softer, the walls lined with photographs of executives and philanthropic award ceremonies. She walked with purpose, passing glass offices until she found a reception desk with a young woman seated behind it, headset in place. Lenora stopped in front of her and said, "I need to speak with Grant Milner. He's expecting me." The receptionist blinked. "He's in a meeting." "Then tell him Lenora Graves is waiting. I'm not showing an appointment. He'll know why I'm here." The receptionist hesitated, picked up the phone, whispered a message, and hung up. "You'll need to wait." After 7 minutes, a tall man with silver hair and a calm face stepped into the corridor. "Ms. Graves, let's step into my office." She followed him into a corner room filled with sunlight and abstract paintings. He gestured to a chair, but she remained standing. "You've blocked my transaction for 6 days. You've reclassified me under phantom protocols. You forged a document and accused me of presenting it. I've gone through 5 separate review levels for a deposit that should have taken 20 minutes. Milner's face did not change. "Ms. Graves, your account structure raised several red flags. My presence raised your discomfort. That's not policy. Your policy is fiction. It's a performance written by the same people who invented Tier for yesterday." Grant Milner nodded, slowly. "We've received complaints from associates about your tone during interactions." "Complaints? I haven't raised my voice once. They say your presence has been described as disruptive to normal flow. I am not here to maintain your flow. I am here to conduct legal business. If you obstruct that again, I will make this very public." He looked at her, held her gaze, and then said, "I'm authorizing a temporary override. Your deposit will be processed today." She waited until Thursday. She walked into the bank at 10:42 a.m., just before the executive brunch rotation and just after the morning rush. This time, she wore the bracelet, not as armor, but as inheritance. She wore a soft gray coat over a black blouse, wide-legged slacks, and leather flats. Her stride was unhurried, but each step had gravity. The staff at the concierge desk looked up. She saw the flicker of recognition before one of them reached for a tablet. She ignored them. She walked directly past the teller line, past the digital welcome board, which, for the first time, displayed her name, though it was misspelled, and stepped into the main office corridor. No one stopped her. She didn't need to ask for directions. She knew exactly where to go. 3 weeks earlier, she had walked this hallway escorted by a compliance officer. Today, she walked it alone. At the end of the hall, a glass-paneled conference room awaited. Inside, 3 people were already seated: Grant Milner, a woman from legal whose name she remembered as Kendra, and a man from the facilities division. They were gathered around a set of printed maps and zoning documents, their conversation low but tense. Lenora entered without knocking. Milner looked up. "Ms. Graves, this room is currently reserved." "Not anymore." She walked to the head of the table and placed a slim leather folder in front of him. Inside were copies of a commercial deed, 3 regulatory letters, and an occupancy agreement. All of them bore her name. The building's name was on the first page. Redstone First Bank Headquarters, 1207, Paxton Avenue. Milner's mouth opened slightly. Kendra leaned forward. "What is this?" "It's the deed. I own this building. You lease it under a 25-year agreement for my development company. My trust funds the property upkeep and the municipal tax offset program you benefit from every year." She flipped to the second page. "I acquired it through a joint acquisition under Graves Municipal Holdings. You know, the entity you flagged as suspicious. The same one that paid for your last parking garage renovation and financed the second elevator shaft." Milner's hand reached slowly toward the documents. "And as of this morning, I've initiated an inspection audit on all tenant compliance protocols. Your bank's treatment of corporate trustees, particularly those on municipal leases, falls under ethical scrutiny if a claim is filed. I have already drafted that claim, The legal woman cleared her throat. "Ms. Graves, let's take a moment." "No, you had your moment. 6 to be exact. 6 consecutive days where your system tried to erase me. 6 days of asking me to prove I belonged in a building I legally own. 6 days of making me answer questions with answers you already had. 6 days of watching you redefine professionalism just to keep me at arm's length." Milner stood. "There's no need for theatrics." "I agree. So let's deal in facts. I have full legal authority to review your lease, freeze your compliance ratings, and delay your upcoming renewal negotiation. I don't want to, but I will if your team continues to treat my presence as illegitimate." Kendra opened her laptop. "We'd like to discuss a resolution. There will be one. But first, I want acknowledgement. I want you to say out loud that you knew." Kendra looked confused. Milner didn't move. "I walked through your lobby every day and saw the way your staff reacted. I was labeled a vendor, a guest, a non-priority. I was measured, questioned, dismissed, scrutinized. And through all of it, you never once stopped to ask who I really was. You assumed I didn't belong because I didn't look the way you expected a property owner to look." Milner exhaled through his nose. "Ms. Graves, say it." A long pause. Then finally he said it. But she returned to observe, to listen, to bear witness to what her presence now triggered in a space that had once engineered her absence. The digital welcome board greeted her name first this time, its gold letters luminous and centered. Below, it scrolled a welcome for executives, followed by tenants and finally trustees. The hierarchy hadn't changed. It had simply repositioned her within it. She approached the elevator and stepped in. The doors began to close, but a hand reached out. A senior associate. She recognized him from the teller queue, entered, eyes cast downward, tie slightly askew. "Good morning," he said, almost reflexively. She nodded. They stood in silence as the elevator ascended. He adjusted his tie again and cleared his throat. "I just wanted to say, we didn't know." Lenora turned toward him. "You didn't ask. That's different." His mouth opened, then closed. The elevator dinged at the executive floor. He didn't step out. He remained in the car as if the timing were wrong now, as if he feared exiting ahead of her. She stayed quiet. The elevator climbed higher, to the top floor used primarily for leaseholder meetings. She exited alone. The top floor hallway was empty except for a single maintenance technician polishing the chrome fixtures on the light sconces. He looked up, startled, and then nodded stiffly. She smiled slightly and walked on. In room 1201, the corner office facing the city skyline, a meeting was already in progress. She paused outside the glass wall. Inside, she saw familiar faces: Grant Milner, the legal counsel Kendra, the client engagement director, and a few executives she had never met. Charts lined the whiteboard. One of them showed a customer experience graph. Another mapped complaint metrics over a 2-year period. None of them looked up as she stood outside. They were speaking in that urgent cadence unique to meetings meant to appear productive. She didn't knock. She simply walked in. The room fell quiet. No one interrupted her this time. Lenora took the open seat at the end of the table and folded her hands in front of her. "I'm not here to retaliate," she began. "I'm here to finish what you started." The silence was palpable. Kendra looked down at her notes. Milner cleared his throat. "You made your point clear yesterday." "Yes. But the problem wasn't only what happened to me. It's how easily it was allowed to happen. The protocols you use, the routing tiers, the so-called compliance escalations, they're not designed to protect the institution. They're designed to filter it. You don't manage risk. You manage access." The client engagement director tried to interject, but Lenora raised a hand. "Let me finish. Your staff executed every protocol exactly as they were trained. That's the problem. They didn't need to break policy to violate trust. They followed it. And when I asked questions, when I pushed back, the system punished me for it. It wasn't an error. It was orchestration." She placed a single sheet of paper on the table. This is a review of your public accommodation practices in comparison to your internal classifications. It shows that 92% of clients who were redirected into Tier 3 or higher over the last 12 months were either first-time visitors or flagged with visual misalignment to expectation profiles. Milner's face hardened. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation. It's your data. I had access to the infrastructure logs. Kendra's voice was quiet. You're suggesting that appearance alone factored into our compliance routing. I'm not suggesting. I'm confirming. The system responded to me exactly how it was built to. And that means you've built something that can't distinguish between risk and discomfort. The man from marketing leaned forward. So what do you want now? Restitution? An apology? I want accountability. Publicly. And I want a platform within this institution to oversee client equity. A position that reports independently to the leaseholder board. Milner raised an eyebrow. You want to build a department here? No. I want to rebuild the one you thought you already had. I want a voice in every compliance review, every routing protocol change, every internal audit of access flow. Lenora didn't attend the early sessions. She didn't need to. Her presence loomed in every agenda item, every whispered conversation between departments, every hallway exchange laced with the words review, oversight, and restructuring. Then, 1 week before the end of quarter deadline, the first consequence fell. Grant Milner resigned. The announcement was sent via internal memo, framed as a transition to new professional opportunities and strategic evolution. But everyone inside the walls of Redstone knew the truth. He had been the face of the system that failed. His removal wasn't just an admission, it was an offering. Lenora read the memo in her office 3 blocks away. She didn't react. She already knew. The resignation had been preceded by a private meeting between Grant and 2 silent board representatives, one of whom had previously signed off on the automated routing framework. The meeting had lasted 12 minutes. It ended without a handshake. 2 days later, the client engagement director was reassigned. Not fired. Moved. Given a title with no department, a position with no staff. The corporate equivalent of exile. Compliance officers were next. 2 were placed on review leave after Lenora's audit flagged repeated escalation patterns tied to key descriptors, phrases like uncertain posture, inconsistent speech pattern, and low familiarity with process. Phrases that were used disproportionately against clients who didn't match visual archetypes. The bank's legal department had no defense. The language came from their own training modules. Lenora had recorded the sessions. She had the transcripts. So when internal investigators asked for a statement, she handed them a single envelope. Inside were 6 printed screenshots, time-stamped and annotated, showing clear alignment between facial profiling data and client routing categories. The proof dismantled the bank's claim that its system was race and class neutral. The algorithms were only as neutral as the people who built them. That truth landed hard. Policies were halted. Protocols suspended. Interim teams were created to rewrite everything from the ground up. Lenora declined the offer to join those teams. She didn't want to build their new walls. She wanted them to tear the old ones down with their own hands. But she did accept one role: Executive Equity Monitor, a position created specifically for her, reporting directly to the leaseholder board, outside the hierarchy of Redstone's executive chart. She was not management. She was accountability. And her first act in that position was to reverse the NP designation system entirely. Non-priority was removed from the classification lexicon. All routing now required human verification before escalation. Lenora implemented a visibility review, a process where anonymized client interactions were evaluated for equitable treatment. No more silent dismissals. No more unsupervised overrides. The effects were immediate. Clients who had once been ushered into filtered pods were now given face-to-face appointments. Verification thresholds were adjusted. Transaction processing delays dropped by 19% in 3 weeks. But not everyone accepted the changes quietly. Some staff resisted, uncomfortable with the loss of discretion. A few filed internal pushback notices, accusing Lenora of overreach, claiming her methods undermined institutional stability. But the board had already chosen a side. The cost of maintaining silence was now greater than the cost of change. And so those objections dissolved in their own irrelevance. Outside the bank, word began to circulate, not through press releases or announcements, but through lived experience. Clients who had once dreaded entering the lobby now found themselves greeted, seated, and acknowledged. A man who had been sent away twice for insufficient ID was now addressed by name before he even reached the counter. A woman with an unlisted business address had her deposit approved within minutes. The environment did not transform overnight, but the architecture began to shift. The scent of citrus still lingered, but now it was no longer the mask of sterile power. It was a remnant of what had been a sensory trace of a structure that once hid its bias behind polish and perfume. In the middle of this quiet upheaval, a security officer approached Lenora as she passed through the lobby. He had worked there for over a decade. Their previous interactions had been few, mostly nods or glances. But this time he stopped her. "I didn't know. Not until the board memo. But I should have known. I watched them treat you like you didn't matter. I stood by, because that's what everyone did." Lenora studied him. His posture was different. Not defensive, penitent. She replied calmly, "You didn't have to know everything to notice what was wrong. And now that you see it, it's yours to help fix." He nodded, the words catching behind his lips. That evening, Lenora stood in the top-floor conference room, alone, watching the city lights blink into the twilight. She looked down at the plaza below, where clients entered and exited without friction. She thought of the first day she was made to feel like a trespasser in a space she owned. She thought of the static badge, the endless forms, the interrogation disguised as policy. Weeks passed, and Redstone First Bank settled into a new rhythm, not one of ease, but of reckoning. Every day brought echoes of decisions made under the old regime, decisions shaped by curated expectations, silent dismissals, and bureaucratic cruelty masked as standard protocol. Lenora Graves did not disappear after the structural changes. She remained a steady presence, not in constant confrontation, but in measured participation. Her office, now situated on the leaseholder floor, bore no title plaque on the door. She insisted on that. Identity, she believed, should be known through action, not signage. Her days were filled with review panels, client equity audits, and staff debriefs, where discomfort now had a seat at the table alongside metrics and margins. Those who had once executed the silent denials of her humanity now sat across from her in scheduled sessions, learning how the systems they defended weren't broken, but rather operating precisely as they were built. And in that realization, something began to shift, not just in structure, but in spirit. It started with small gestures. A compliance officer who once redirected her to a waiting area now asked pointed questions in meetings about implicit bias indicators. A teller who had printed her smudged receipt on the second day now volunteered for a cross-departmental task force on equitable service design. These changes weren't dramatic or fast, but they were real. And Lenora, though still watchful, began to see the walls soften. One morning, she arrived earlier than usual and found herself sharing an elevator with the very employee who had once handed her the NP badge. He greeted her with the same thin smile he'd always worn, but this time his eyes held something else, uncertainty laced with resolve. He spoke carefully. "I know I can't undo how I treated you. I followed the script. I told myself I wasn't responsible. But I remember the look on your face when I peeled off that badge. I remember not asking your name. I can't forget it, and I don't want to." She nodded, accepting the words without indulgence or bitterness. Change, she knew, did not start with apologies. It started with ownership. At the ground level, the bank launched its first client humanity initiative. Not a marketing campaign, not a PR stunt. An internal mandate. It redefined how clients were to be addressed, how assumptions were challenged, and how value was no longer to be measured by visible conformity. Lenora worked with department leads to remove descriptors like high-risk appearance, unconfirmed behavior pattern, and non-standard cadence. She had them replaced with behavior-based observation, context-based evaluation, and an end to escalation without human review. The symbolic weight of those changes rippled beyond the bank. Word spread, not through advertisements, but through voices, clients who no longer feared being doubted before being heard. Organizations reached out. Partners listened. Other institutions began asking for her protocols. She shared them, but only if they agreed to embed them at the root, not as optics, but as operating principles. And still, amid the reform, the deeper question lingered. Could a place that had profited from silence truly change? Could the individuals who once embodied that silence become its loudest challengers? Lenora did not answer that question in words. She answered it in the invitation she extended weeks later. The bank's main conference hall, rarely used except for quarterly updates and board votes, was opened for a gathering of employees from every department. No podium, no cameras, just chairs arranged in a circle. Lenora stood among them, her presence quiet, commanding. She asked one thing of each person in the room. Describe a moment you dismissed someone's humanity, not out of hate, but out of policy. The room was still at first. Then someone from IT spoke. I deleted a complaint email without reading it because the sender had a free account address. I assumed they weren't important. A teller followed. I refused to process a withdrawal for a woman who couldn't speak clearly. I said she needed documentation, but I think she had a medical condition. More voices joined. One by one, the curated mask of neutrality unraveled. Lenora listened. When it was her turn, she didn't speak of revenge. She spoke of the cost. I didn't cry when you humiliated me. I didn't yell. But I went home that night and sat in silence for 4 hours, questioning whether I had imagined it all. That's what curated injustice does. It doesn't scream. It whispers until you start to doubt your own name. That's the part we have to undo. After that day, the culture began to deepen. Not soften, deepen. There were missteps, of course. There were still glances that carried remnants of the past. Still meetings where unconscious bias emerged. But they no longer went unchallenged. The system now had people inside it who had once benefited from its silence and had chosen to break it. And in time, those people began to lead. One of them was the same associate who misclassified Lenora at the entrance. He requested reassignment to the Humanity Initiative. He wrote new onboarding modules for teller training. He asked Lenora to review them personally. They were not perfect, but they were real. And when Lenora read them, she didn't offer praise. She offered edits. The work of transformation, she believed, was never finished. It was maintained. And perhaps that was the greatest change of all, not that the bank had become perfect, but that it had become willing to remain accountable. Months later, a young woman entered the bank wearing a plain coat, her hair in a braid, carrying an envelope and nothing more. She was directed to the teller queue, where someone asked her name, confirmed it respectfully, and asked if she would like assistance. The teller didn't flinch at her appearance, didn't redirect her. She was seen. And behind the glass partition, Lenora Graves watched. She didn't intervene. She didn't need to. The institution had begun to see beyond its own reflection. And in that moment, everything the system had once tried to erase now lived as the force driving its evolution. Lenora turned, walked back toward her office, and passed by the wall where the bank displayed portraits of its historical executives. She paused. The wall had been updated. Among the new portraits was a frame that read, Equity Oversight Leadership Established by Lenora Graves. Not owner, not victim, not token, architect. That was her legacy, not because she demanded to be seen, but because she built a world where no one would have to demand it again. The end. If you're enjoying this story and want to see more powerful narratives like it, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about the plot so far? Were there any moments that stood out to you? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what you'd like to see next. Your feedback helps shape what comes next.